All right. Welcome to anybody who's watching with us today on YouTube. We're glad that you're tuned in with us today at this moment, or if you pick it up at some point later on this week, we're glad that you've chosen to be part of our Bible study today. We're still in the book of Acts. We're in chapter 12, the last part of the book of Acts that's specifically focused on Peter, the apostle. We'll hear brief mention of him in the remainder of the book, but beginning with chapter 13, pretty much everything is focused on the Apostle Paul from this point forward all the way to the end of the book. And so this is the part of the book where Peter takes his exit. But he goes, the end of his story is told with quite a flourish. We see him get arrested, and we see a great miracle deliver him. And so it's an exciting chapter. But it is, for Luke, the end of Peter's story with respect to the church. Remember, and again, this just helps us to remember, Luke is simply giving us, a kind of a single shot. This isn't everything in the world that's happening in the church. There are plenty of other Christians all over the place doing things in all other places. He's just focusing in from this point forward on Paul. Just as before this time, he was primarily focused on Peter and John and the church in Jerusalem. So never forget that there's a whole lot more going on than meets the eye when we read these passages. Let's start off reading the first 5 verses that get us started in the story. About this time, King Herod laid violent hands upon some who belonged to the church. He had James, the brother of John, killed with a sword. After he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. This was during the festival of unleavened bread. When he had seized him, he put him in prison and handed him over to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending to bring him out to the people after the Passover. While Peter was kept in prison, the church prayed fervently to God for him. Herod starts to persecute the church. This is Herod Agrippa, who is the grandson of Herod the Great. Herod the Great is the one that you always think of first and foremost when you see the name Herod. He took up reign in the area, Judea, 30 years or so, 40 years before Jesus is born, in that time frame generally. And so he is in power when Jesus is born. He is, as a matter of fact, is the Herod that sets the extermination plan in motion, trying to find the baby Jesus and trying to take him out. And so he has all the newborn male babies killed in those days in that area, in that kingdom. So Herod the Great. We've talked about him before. Did some wonderful things, mighty things, but also was paranoid and was dangerous. And brought a lot of destruction to the world as well, all for self-serving motives. But this is his grandson, one of his grandsons, Herod Agrippa, who has come to reign in the area, and he actually has a pretty extensive reign in that area, Judea, Galilee. He has a good bit of territory under his control at this time. And he is of Jewish heritage. He actually, his lineage goes back to the days of Judas Maccabeus. We've talked about him in some of our other studies, who led the revolt against the Seleucid ruler Antiochus Epiphanes, who set up the worship of pagan gods in the temple. Back in 167, 165, somewhere in that neighborhood, BC. So he's got a good lineage, and he has some, he is Jewish in his heritage to some extent, and so he's fairly popular with the Jewish people, the Jewish leadership, and so we don't know if he's actually trying to curry it more by his taking on the church, or if he just happens to take on the church and then finds out that it, wins him some brownie points, and then he decides to up the ante. We're told that he it turns in violence towards the church in these days. And then he has James, the brother of John, one of the Zebedees, James, killed. This is not James, the brother of Jesus, who is a leader in the church, will be mentioned in the time to come. This is James, the brother of John, the sons of Zebedee. He is killed when it receives when it receives applause from the Jewish leadership. Then Herod feels emboldened to go after others. As a ruler, you've always got to keep the people happy and do it on your terms as best you can. If you can stay out in front of the game and do it on your terms and make the people happy, be proactive rather than reactive, then you're a pretty smart ruler. And Herod certainly gives evidence of being a fairly smart guy. And so he's upping the ante now. James, you don't hear much about at all. We would think that he's a lesser of the leaders, but he's going after Peter now. He's going up to the top. This signifies an intensification of the persecution of the church. Certainly the church was being persecuted, but now they're going after the apostles. And so he's had Peter arrested. Now, how much that Herod understands about what's going on between the church and the Jewish leadership, we don't know. Certainly, he knew that the Jewish leadership didn't like the church, was trying to stamp out the church. But he probably also got word somewhere along the way that Peter had been involved in this mess with the Gentiles. Peter's starting to consort with the Gentiles, which is offensive not just to the Judaizers in the church, to the Jewish Christians who think, you ought not to have anything to do with the Gentiles. It's also offensive to the Jews outside the church. And it's another reason for them to hate the church. Not only are they promoting this blasphemous Jesus as the Messiah, but now they're starting to take this message. They're trying to break down the barriers between, the Jews and the Gentiles. So we don't know all the intricacies behind it, all the motivations, all the connection points, but we can imagine that Herod is a savvy leader and that he knows what's going on with the Jewish leadership, and he sees Peter as a very prime target. Now, he gets Peter arrested, but it is right at Passover time, and he doesn't want to do anything to detract from Passover. He's playing the game. He wants to, make sure that the leaders know he's on their side and that he's doing things on the up and up for them. So he has Peter arrested. He's going to hold on to him till after Passover, and then he'll have him executed. What a great Passover gift, right, for the Jewish leadership. So, he's got him under intense guard, security measures. He's got 4 guards with him at all times. In the next little segment, we'll see how he is situated in prison and how they're trying to keep him under wraps in prison. It is interesting, and I'll point you to it here, and you'll we read through these passages, notice how Luke's telling of the story echoes the story of Jesus, his the night of his arrest, his death, his resurrection. You're going to see various elements that kind of echo Jesus' story in play here in this story. And the first one being that Peter gets arrested at Passover time, just as Jesus was arrested at Passover. That's kind of a subtle little theme. I don't know, if Luke is adding some rhetorical flourish to it to draw that, pull that together, or if it's just one of those neat providential coincidences that link the two stories together. But pay attention to that as we go along here in reading this. So we've got Peter arrested. The motivation behind it, and that Herod has him under lock and key, waiting for Passover to get finished, and then he's gonna have a big hanging party and get rid of him. Yes, sir. I didn't look for that. I didn't know. sometime in the 40s, 30s to 40s. And this is, sometime in that general time frame, I would think. Read the next section, beginning with verse 6. The very night before Herod was going to bring him out, he's ready to execute him. Peter, bound with 2 chains, was sleeping between 2 soldiers, while guards in front of the doors were keeping watch over the prison. He's under lock and key. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He tapped Peter on the side and woke him, saying, "Get up quickly." And the chains fell off his wrists. The angel said to him, "Fasten your belt and put on your sandals." He did so. Then he said to him, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me." Peter went out and followed him. He did not realize that what was happening with the angel's help was real. He thought he was seeing a vision. After they had passed the first and second guard, they came before the iron gate leading into the city. It opened for them of its own accord, and they went outside and walked along a lane when suddenly the angel left him. Then Peter came to himself and said, "Now I am sure that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from the hands of Herod and from all that the Jewish people were expecting." Luke gives the details of what's going on here. Peter's deliverance by the angel in jail. Peter thinks that he's seeing a vision. This is late at night. Surely everybody's asleep. That's the best time to get somebody out of jail. If you've watched enough jailbreak movies, you know that's when they always get out of jail. It's during the middle of the night. Yes, it is. Peter is sleeping, and he's awakened, and these things are happening, and he doesn't know if he's having a vision, dream experience kind of thing, or if it's for real. He learns after he gets out that it is indeed for real. The story's told in a very straightforward sort of fashion. God's angel comes and delivers him and gets him out of the prison the whole way, and only leaves him after he has gotten him safe and sound out of the prison. All the details are really neat. When the angel tells him to fasten his belt and put on his sandals, he's telling him, "Get up, you're getting ready to go." When he tells him to, pull your cloak around you, wrap your cloak around you, he's telling you want to hide yourself. You don't want people to be able to recognize you. So if you read the story, it's the angel's preparing him to go, to leave, to break out, and to get away. So there, and this is in the middle of the night. So other than the bright light that shines when the angel first comes to Peter, there's no, there's no noisy kind of deliverance here. Again, this kind of reminds you of Jesus' resurrection. We often think of the resurrection. We have all these images of ourselves of what might have taken place in there. But all we're told in the Bible is that when the women show up, the stone is rolled away and Jesus is gone. We don't get to know what happened, It takes place in secret. And there's not a lot of earth-shaking stuff going on. It's the same thing with Peter being delivered from the jail. The angel comes to him just as the angel came to Jesus and participated in the raising of him from the dead and getting him out, rolling the stone away for Jesus to escape, for the women to see. Again, there's some similarities going on here. Peter has been arrested as Jesus was arrested at Passover. Peter is in jail, which is basically the prison, but he is resurrected. He is given escape. He is taken out from the jail. The angel doing it, but it's in the middle of the night, and nobody knows. In just a minute, we're going to come up to the reunion scene, which is going to be very much like resurrection morning. Everybody thinks he's dead, pretty much. I mean, they're still praying for him, but they assume he's dead. And the joy that they have that he's alive, it really has the look and feel of the resurrection of Jesus. Now, from a narrative perspective, that is, if you're Luke and you're wanting to tell Peter's story, this is a great place for Peter to die a wonderful death, right? I mean, he's going to be done with Peter from this point on. And, what better way to go out than a blaze of glory? If you're making this up, telling the story and giving it, and Luke is exercising some artistic license. Anybody that's writing a story is going to engage in it in a certain way, using those arts of storytelling. And so this would be a great place for Peter to exit the stage and to go out in a blaze of glory, because we're not going to hear much about him from this point on in Luke's account. But of course he doesn't die. And that heightens the sense for us as we look at the story. That heightens the sense of, what was next for Peter? He didn't die. God preserved his life. So what's going on next? And we don't know. Peter's ministry from this point on is obscured to us. We don't know where he goes and what he does. They don't even identify the place that he goes to after he leaves the disciples there in Jerusalem. Where does he go? What's going on? And so we wonder, what all Peter did after this point. We don't know. We can't say exactly. We have hints from other places and other times of places where Peter may have gone and work he may have done, but we don't know. His story is hidden from us. Again, he represents all those other apostles. Remember, the only apostles we hear about are James and John and Peter. We don't know what the rest of the apostles were really doing much. We don't know what the other evangelists who've been set loose in all this are doing. There's so much gospel work, so much church work going on in so many different places. And we're just looking at one little sliver of all that. But the bottom line is that God had work for Peter to do. He wasn't ready for him to exit the story. And so even as he exits the story in Luke's account of it in the book of Acts, his story goes on. And he's got plenty of other work to do. The Lord has preserved his life, has set him free, and has now sent him off to do other work in other places. Verse 12, as soon as he realized this, he went to the house of Mary. That is Peter. As soon as he realized that this was for real, in other words, he wasn't just dreaming, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose other name was Mark, John Mark, where many had gathered and were praying. That is, many of the disciples. When he knocked at the outer gate, a maid named Rhoda came to answer. On recognizing Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed that instead of opening the gate, she ran in and announced that Peter was standing at the gate. That's just a great comic moment there. There's so many little details in this that tell you this is an authentic story. You're not going to make this up. I mean, this, you would have Peter going in a much grander fashion. This is kind of embarrassing, actually, Why didn't you let him in? What are you doing, But she's so overjoyed, and she goes in and tells everybody that she's heard his voice, and so she knows he's alive, and she goes in and tells everybody else. Now, what happens when she goes in and tells everybody else? They don't believe her. They said to her, "You are out of your mind." But she insisted that it was so. They said, "It is his angel." Meanwhile, Peter continued knocking. Peter's out there knocking. They're in there debating whether or not he's alive or not. I mean, it really is comical. You got to appreciate it. Meanwhile, Peter continued knocking, and when they opened the gate, they saw him and were amazed. He motioned to them with his hand to be silent and described for them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he added, "Tell this to James and to the brothers and sisters." Then he left and went to another place. We're not even told where Peter goes. You're off the stage, buddy. It's over. You've had your part. And I rather like that point. Ministers always think they're so important, and they come to this church and they do this great work, right? And, you know, they're the reason the church is whatever. No, we're all bit actors, you know. God moves us on the stage and God moves us off the stage, and, you know, you play your part and then your part's over. Go, some other place. Now it's time for somebody else to come in and carry on the work. The importance is the work, not the people. You know, it's a great kick in the seat to the ego. You know, it ain't about you. It's about the work. It's about the church. It's about what God is doing. You play your part and then move on. Let the next one come and do the next part. So anyway, again, are y'all getting the connection to the resurrection story? I mean, you've seen this, that, you know, he comes and he knocks on the door, and they have this debate about whether, you know, Rhoda goes and tells them that Peter's alive, and they're like, what are you talking about? You know, you're out of your mind. And then they say, well, maybe it's his angel. Maybe you just saw a vision. And they're debating whether or not Peter's alive. I mean, that's resurrection morning, right? The women go to the tomb, they see the tomb empty, and they meet the angel, and the angel tells them to, that Jesus has been risen from the dead, and they go back and they tell their disciples, and they tell them that they're crazy. They don't believe them. Interesting also, after they finally let Peter in and he talks to them, and he describes what the Lord had done for him, in the last verse, or beginning of the last verse, and he added, tell this to James and to the brothers and sisters. James, the brother of the Lord, the brothers and sisters in the church in Jerusalem. Go tell them what's happened. What does the angel tell the ladies? Go and tell the disciples to meet me in Galilee, you know, or to go ahead and I'll be there to meet with them. I mean, it really does parallel the story. And again, I think, you know, Luke is drawing on the coincidences, the providential coincidences, to knit the two things together, to make some important points. Number one, you know, as Jesus suffered and what all that Jesus went through, the disciples will probably go through at some point, or some variation of it. Jesus himself said, if they hated me, they're going to hate you. If they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. And you know, Paul took that seriously, and he was glad to suffer as Jesus suffered. You know, it was a privilege for him to suffer as Jesus suffered. Well, here, you know, it's going to happen. You know, as Jesus suffered, as he was rejected, as he went through difficult times, as his life was threatened, the church's life is going to go through that. The disciples may go through that. So I think, you know, it's making that point, the connection between what Jesus went through, his disciples can go through. But it also makes the point that God is with them. You know, whatever they go through, God is with them. God was with Peter in jail. Peter was on the verge of being executed, and God delivered him. And you know, that's the message to the church. Lo, I'm with you always to the end of the age. You know, Jesus sends out the disciples and you know, tells them to go and preach the gospel and make disciples of all those who believe. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the age. Christ goes with us. God goes with us. God, you know, whatever we have to go through, God is with us. And God will bring deliverance to us many, many times. And so it's emphasizing, I think, that point as well. But also, back to the first point, you know, it also, you know, just because God is with you doesn't mean you're not going to go through suffering and trial and tribulation. And it doesn't mean that you won't have to give your life for the sake of the kingdom. As I was reading the story, and as I was reading this point, you know, I thought of that proverbial airplane crash. You know, and they have an airplane crash. You see it more in movies than you do in real life. I think it's a great trope for movies. But you know, you know, you talk to the survivors, those who survived. You know, and what do they say? God was with me. I prayed, and God delivered me. But why didn't God deliver the other ones? Why did God save this one and not that one? And so that's kind of here too. Why Peter and not James? Why didn't God save both of them? Why didn't God take both of them? Of course, we don't know. That's the mystery of God's work in the world. We all belong to God. Our lives belong to God, and they are there for His use. And it's, it's not, however God wants to use our lives, God will use our lives. And He may use this life in this way and this life in that way. He may put this guy as a minister of a big church, and this one as a missionary way out in the boondocks where there are 5 people, that he's dealing with out in the way boony docks. He may exalt this one, to some big position of privilege in this great country, and then this other one works in a low country, doing menial kind of stuff. This one dies, this one's life is saved. It's not up to us. We all belong to God. Our lives belong to God. And they are there for Him to use, and He will use them as He sees fit. Now that sounds horrible and terrible until we remember the truth that this life is not the main thing. It's the life to come. This life is meant to prepare us for the main thing. We're all going to die. Unless Jesus comes tomorrow, we're all going to die. There's no escaping that. But our lives don't belong to us, and God will preserve them as long as God wants to, needs to, has determined that it's best to, for His purposes. We were talking on Sunday night about the priesthood of the believer, and we're going to talk more about that this week, a little bit more. But the priesthood of the believer, one of the things that I was saying the other night, we're all priests. And one of the manifestations of that is, that your life belongs to God just as much as the minister's life does. We talk all the time about the pastor, and the pastor needs to go where God calls the pastor to go, here, there, and yonder. Well, you do too. You're no different. We always act like you are, but no. Whether you're called to be a minister of a church or not, you belong to God. You are a priest, and your life is His, and He can use it however He wants to use it. And it may be life or death in some circumstance. But again, the only death that matters is your death to self through baptism and faith in Jesus Christ. On the other side of our deaths in this life, there's life with God forever. And so this is the area where God is working out the work of salvation, and we have our parts to play in that work. And we're all going to die at some point, but we're going to live forever with Christ on the other side of this life. And so it's not, it's hard for us. It's tragic for us because of the pain, of losing loved ones. But the reality is that we're all headed to that destination, and that we're all, God's instruments in this life for His purposes. And so I think that's manifest here in this particular episode. James's life is taken, Peter's life is spared. Peter's life is delivered miraculously. Why Peter and not James? We can't say, but it doesn't matter. God has used James as God has deemed it right to use James. God is using Peter as God deems it right to use Peter. And Peter himself will suffer a martyr's death before it's all said and done. Last portion of the story, Herod gets his comeuppance. Verses 18 and following, when morning came, there was no small commotion among the soldiers over what had become of Peter. That's an understatement, right? No small commotion. In fact, when Herod had searched for him and could not find him, he examined the guards and ordered them to be put to death. Yeah, Herod wasn't too happy about this, and so they suffered the ultimate penalty for it. Then he went down from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there. Caesarea is where the king's quarters were. Now Herod was angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon. We're on to another story now. We're going to learn about what happens to Herod. Now Herod was angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, so they came to him in a body, and after winning over Blastus, the king's personal attendant, they asked for a reconciliation because their country depended on the king's country for food. Stop right there for a second. Tyre and Sidon are two cities up the coast from Caesarea. Not that far, but up the coast. Tyre and Sidon, their economies depended on what they could get from Galilee, food-wise. Somehow or another, they had upset Herod. That somebody had done something, either the leadership had or the average people had, and so Herod was upset with them, and they were afraid that Herod was going to cut off their food supply. So they send a contingent to Herod. They find one of his officials, Blastus, and they win him over, and he goes before the king on their behalf, and they work out an opportunity to try and make amends for things. There's a festival coming up at which Herod is going to speak, and they're going to show up in force, to applaud him and to, cheer him on and all this kind of stuff. So that's what's going on here in all this. Okay, back to verse 21. On an appointed day, Herod put on his royal robes, took his seat on the platform, and delivered a public address to them. The people kept shouting, "The voice of a god and not of a mortal." And immediately, because he had not given the glory to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. But the word of God continued to advance and gain adherents. Then after completing their mission, Barnabas and Saul returned to Jerusalem and brought with them John, whose other name was Mark. That's John Mark. And Barnabas and Saul had gone, remember back when when we left them in Antioch, they had made a collection of offerings and stuff, and they had taken it to Judea for the saints there. But go back to the story now. So there's this festival, and Herod is speaking at it, and Herod puts on his royal robes. Josephus, the Jewish historian, tells of this encounter. He corroborates this encounter with his, and he's not trying to, but he corroborates it. Herod had this robe made of silver, and it was specially woven. And so Josephus talks about how when he walked out in the sun hit that silver, and it was like he was gleaming. He was just kind of shimmering. And the look of it all made him look like a sun god, which, a lot of the pagan peoples worshipped. And so, the sight of it, plus they were already primed to, cheer him on. What political speech, right? And you go and you clap every time they say a word, and every bullet point you get a great ovation. Well, they're already primed to make Herod feel great and try to win him back by showing how much they love him. But then the sight of this robe, dazzling sight, causes them to just the voice of a god and not of a mortal. We used to think you were a god, but now we know that you are more than just. We used to think you were just a man, but now we know that you're more than just a man. And so the whole of the moment, is grand, and they're basically calling him God. And the text tells us, and Josephus also says, Herod doesn't say anything against it. He doesn't deny it. He doesn't say, whoa, now I'm not a god, I'm just a king. No, he kind of eats it up. And that's when he is struck down. Now, in Josephus's account, it talks about, as Herod was doing a speech, and after that particular moment, he had seen an owl on some rope somewhere off to the side, and he interpreted that as a bad omen. Not long after that, he started to develop pains in his abdomen. And they became so severe that they took him off the stage and took him into the palace. And in 5 days, he died of some sort of intestinal issue. And that's what Luke is pointing at here. Immediately, because he had not given the glory to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. So it's an intestinal kind of thing he dies from. Luke, of course, interprets it as judgment against Herod for not giving glory to God instead of taking it for himself. But you also know, you got to know that what's behind it is this persecution of the church and his taking of the life of James. God's judgment is visited upon Herod for the evil he has brought upon the church. So Herod dies, 54 years of age, had been king for, I think, 6 or 7 years at that point. But that, again, that's not the last word. The last word in the chapter is the church goes on. And the mention of Saul and Barnabas points to what's going to happen in chapter 13. Very first thing that happens in chapter 13, Saul and Barnabas are commissioned on that first missionary journey of Paul's. So the church does indeed go on. No matter what comes its way, no matter what the trials and tribulations are, the church always goes forward. It's God's church. Powerful end to the story. Thoughts, questions, comments? All right. Yeah. I think it's in chapter 15 when they have the council at Jerusalem. I have to look and make sure, but I think he's there. Yeah, he is. Peter's there, and he makes a speech. So he's still exercising leadership. Probably was in and around the church in Jerusalem for a while. I've got some other sources I need to go and look at to find. There are other places that he is linked to beyond these days. I'll try to look that up for next time. All right. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for watching on YouTube.